Welcome back to Sunday Evening Devotions. Well, I'm downtown Sandusky at the Veterans Park. We have all these memorials that memorialize people that gave their lives for the safety and security of our great country. Now that has a relationship to where our story is today, as we look at the end of Joshua's book. Actually, you want to go back to chapter 21 and then to the end of the book, chapter 24. Remember, we were looking at how the land had been divided up. The people entered the land, and we mentioned the tribes had gotten their lands. And then what had happened was that the Levites didn't get a particular piece of land as the other tribes did, but they were in cities scattered throughout where they could teach the people. Some of their cities were the cities of refuge, where if you committed a crime such as accidentally killing somebody, you could flee for refuge for a period of time. And so the Levites had authority over those cities, and that was their position. And then there was the return of the eastern tribes, Manasseh and Gad and others, and Reuben, that went back across the Jordan River, and they had the issue when they erected a memorial, thinking about memorials here, but a memorial to the other tribes that they were still part of Israel. But it was misunderstood because they made the memorial in the form of an altar, and the tribes on the western side thought that perhaps they were going to sacrifice to a different god. And so we see that worked out. But that gets us to this idea of memorials, which takes us to Joshua and his death and all that is related to that. Joshua calls the people together and gives them his farewell speech. And then in the last chapter, he renews the covenant with them in Shechem. Now, Shechem's an interesting place. It's a memorial. That's where Abraham was visited by God, where Abraham first went when he came into the promised land, and God visited him there and spoke to him after calling him out of the Ur of the Chaldees. And so he calls all of Abraham's descendants now as Israel, a nation, and that they might make and renew the covenant with God. And all this then, as things are wrapped up, and Joshua reminds the people that God had fulfilled every single one of his promises. All the promises were fulfilled. He had brought them into the land, and God had done all these things. And that they could only walk by faith and not by their own efforts. And so then Joshua dies, and then Eleazar, the priest, the son of Aaron, he dies. Joseph's bones are buried, and a memorial is remembered as these graves are set up. Why? What's going on here? How do we understand Christian burial in the Old Testament? Well, just like these memorials mark not only lives, but sacrifices that are given. So, when we bury somebody, we're remembering that life. But more than that, what's happening there? And what we need to understand the work of Christ is about, who Joshua is a figure of, is that, well, when we bury somebody, we know that their soul is in heaven. But you see, they are now part of the land. It is the promise, a down payment, that the new heavens and the new earth belong to God's people. It's a promise of the resurrection. We bury them in the confidence and hope that God's people will be raised again from the dead, and they will share in that new heavens and new earth. So we're not just putting something away from our sight. We're not just memorializing something just to remember, but really it's a guarantee and a down payment. You see what Joshua is as the Old Testament figure of Christ. He's the mediator that brought the people into the land, that fulfilled all of God's promises, just as Jesus has gone before us and entered into heaven, and is the guarantee of our promised eternal life. And that God keeps his promises to us. And so we remember, we memorialize, we think of all that God has accomplished for us, and the down payment's been paid. And so when we bury our beloved dead in the Lord, it's a down payment that the new heavens and the new earth, that inheritance belongs to them and to us. That God is at work, and God will complete that work. And all that is through Jesus Christ. Well, that's good news.